So I'm going to try not overwhelm you. Good evening, welcome to this evening's talks as part of the Bristol Housing Festival. This is the third out of a series of 5 talks taking place over this week, each looking at different themes as kind of part of the kind of broader challenges we're facing as a nation, as a city in terms of housing. So this evening we're talking about co-living models celebrating interdependence over independence. I've been practicing that, so that's kind of good. So my name's Nick James. I have a background in design and sustainable housing, valuation, delivery of it over the last 20 years or so. But you won't be hearing that much from me. You'll be hearing from our 3 fantastic speakers. So we have Oona Goldsworthy from United Communities, CEO of United Communities. We have Andy Redfern, affordable housing development consultant, and Rachel Butler, co-founder, co-director of Tiny House Community Bristol. So each of our speakers is going to have a 20-minute slot, and they're going to talk to you about their kind of experience, some of their examples on that theme. We're going to hold questions until the end, if that's okay. So we just have the three talks run through, and then we should have about half an hour for questions at the end. So store them up. I should say that we are streaming this evening on Facebook Live. So you won't be filmed unless you kind of come up here and kind of rush the stage or anything. So so don't do that. So just to let you know. And I guess worth saying for those of you who don't know about the Bristol Housing Festival, I'm sure that's none of you all know all about it. But it's launched this last week. There are some fantastic examples of different sort of housing solutions down on the waterfront, which are well worth a look. It's open for a few more days. And this programme of talks kind of complements that as a launch of what is a 5-year festival. So it's a fantastic amount of time to both celebrate and share some of the great examples of what's working well in Bristol already around housing, some of the examples that can be replicated and some from around the country, around the world that could have a place in Bristol, but also to provide that level of focus. So 5 years is a good amount of time really in housing to kind of really drill down and for new models, new examples to be looked at and to actually be tried and tested in Bristol. So this is about new ideas coming forwards over those 5 years to help tackle housing in Bristol. So I think that's enough from me. So I'm going to hand over to Oona, who's going to start.
Do I need the microphone?
Probably. That's right, I think it's down to start.
Evening everyone, I've got to work out how to hold this and actually do the clicky bit as well, so bear with me. Thanks Nick. So I'm Oona Goldsworthy, I'm Chief Executive of United Communities. We're a community-based housing association. Most of our homes, we've got just under 2,000 homes across Bristol and the Western England. And it's gone blank. How do I press it? And I'm going to talk to you tonight, and I can't possibly say that word, codependent, far too long a sentence, isn't it? But I'm going to talk to you about some models that I've been looking at across the world, which I think we're already either in the process of bringing back into Bristol, or there's a potential for us to do that. But before I start, we're going to end with a project which is really exciting, which we're in the process of trying to get on the ground in Bristol. And I have 2 co-presenters in the front row who I'm going to introduce, and they're going to wave to you. So I've got Ben Pilning, who is from Bristol Students' Union, University Students' Union, and Jamie, who is from 1625. And at the end of my presentation, if I'm not cut off too quickly, Ben and Jamie are going to stand up and say a few words about why they're involved in the project. So my journey around this came about because I was incredibly fortunate last year to win a fellowship, a Churchill Fellowship. And my subject I wanted to look at was looking at ways that other countries are looking at housing young people, and particularly housing millennials, not just in affordable housing, but across the board. Because it can't have escaped any of you, and particularly those millennials in the audience, that this is a huge issue, that the access to affordable housing, the access to any housing, never mind affordable housing, is really, really difficult and very problematic in our cities. And guess what? We're not alone. It's something that's shared pretty much across all the developed countries. And I went to Australia, I've been to various parts of Europe, and I'm going to share some of those things with you now. So the first one, which I absolutely loved, is a project in Holland, in Deventer, which is about an hour outside Amsterdam. And it's called Humanitas. And it's a old people's scheme, about 120 older people living there. And the chief executive of this residential home suddenly thought we could do with some young people around here. So no policies, no procedures, no big strategies, just got on and did it and introduced 6 students to live in the home. What that's done is there's more students living there now. What it's done is just injected a bit of life and a bit of difference. And another thing I picked up hugely from the Netherlands was the concept of mixing it all up. Not just thinking that you've got to live in one place, older people live in one place, young people live in one place, students live in one place. Actually, that's not how society works, that's not how communities work, and mixing it all up. It works amazingly. You can see in the pictures one of the older residents on a scooter, and that's what we heard from young people who live there and from the older people. It's about friendship, it's about humanity, it's about that codependence, interdependence, and it's about combating loneliness as well. Other end of the scale, this is a scheme in North London in Gospel Oak, and this is called The Collective. Private sector model, and it's 500 bed spaces, lots of tiny, tiny little rooms. Not sure, how I feel about it, but it's a model out there which is interesting. This is run by an entrepreneur, set it up, young entrepreneur, millennial. And what's important about this space is there's loads and loads of communal space. So there's a cinema, there's a sauna, there's a gym, there's everything you can think of. Quite expensive actually to live in, but there are operators who are talking about bringing it down to other cities, particularly Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, thinking that there is a market for this. The thing I did like about it was the social activity that goes on here. So every night of the week there was something going on. And particularly for younger people, perhaps leaving university, used to that student way of living, that collective way of living, this offers an opportunity to get on your feet in a new city and to meet other people. And again, combat some of that loneliness. So I think it has got a place. It may not be everywhere, but there's certainly a niche for it. This is a project right on the other side of the world in Byron Bay. Some of the most expensive real estate in the world. So if you've got the most expensive places to live in the world are, I think Hong Kong is the top, and then Sydney, Melbourne follow quite soon after that, and Byron Bay, believe it or not, is one of them. Beautiful, 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 but incredibly expensive to live in. And this is an entrepreneur, young developer, who just decided that he was from Byron Bay, he'd had enough of seeing families and young people having to move out of Byron Bay, and he's developed live-work units. Very much part of a community. You've got work accommodation on the ground floor and residential accommodation above. He rents them out, they're not for sale, he rents them out at discounted market rent. He's done it without any public funding, he's just got on and done it and works. And it's meant that some of those creative industries, which were being forced out of Byron Bay, are now able to stay. And I think that's a really interesting model about Australia, which is different to us. There's not much public funding at all, it's not a good thing. So the philanthropists have actually stepped in to fill some of that gap. So you get a lot of people, a lot of developers and rich people actually wanting to put something back. And we probably don't have that culture here to the same extent. Quite like public funding, by the way, so I don't want to get rid of that. This is, some of you may have heard of Baugruppe. Anybody, hands up, who's heard of Baugruppe? So Baugruppe is something I hadn't known about before, but it's very common across Germany, and it's a form of housing which is about co-housing, it is about co-living. But rather than a commercial developer having to find the money and put all the money up, this is where a group of people, often led by architects, actually, interestingly, will pool together, pool their resources. The money that they're able to put in might be 10 grand, might be 20 grand, or less. They pool together, and that gives us enough equity to enable them to attract a loan for the rest of the build. And they then can control that building, so they can have a design that they want. They're not stuck to the developer type of units that get put, the sort of spec build that you see everywhere. It's a project right in the centre of Berlin. Commercial land, they had to pay commercial prices. They've built something which is amazing. It's got community rooms, it has a nursery, lots of gardens. It's quite unruly in places, but it's really, really beautiful. and they've got shared units there as well. And this is how the world travels. So a group of architects in Melbourne, having heard about Baugruppe in Berlin, went to visit Berlin and came up with their own model in Melbourne. And this is one of their projects, their first project. They've done it very sustainably. It hasn't got air conditioning, but it's passively heat controlled. Lots of public spaces in there. Relatively affordable. It is all for sale, it's not for rent. And on the back of this, they've now got another 5 projects underway and are looking at exporting it to other countries as well. Right back home with the Bristol Community Land Trust. I don't know if anyone from there is here tonight, but this is a small scale perhaps in Bristol, but a group of people who've come together. They've now got 400 members across Bristol. They're actually based in United Communities, and we've supported them for the last few years. This is their first project. It was really, really, really hard to do. It's not all self-build, it's got an element of self-finish instead. But I think it's a proof of concept in a way, is by looking at how we did that, we've been able to move on to our next project with the CLT, which is the Sheldon Road scheme in Lockleys. And this is 50 units. And this is again on the principles of communal space, shared gardens, very, very high energy saving as well. They're going to be 50% are going to be for rent and 50% will be for shared ownership. The group in the bottom are the residents that have been meeting for the last few years, and subject to highways, they're going to move in or start work on site in January. And that will be the biggest community land trust scheme in the city. And then before I get on to Launchpad, this is another project which is about preventing homelessness. It's called Kids Undercover. It's in Melbourne. And it's been going for 25 years, so it's not flash in the pan. It's proved that it's worked. It's had lots of peer evaluation. And this is a recognition by a group of people who thought that there was a way to stop families breaking up, and that way that families in crisis and a young person going through a particular stage of their lives, those who are teenagers will recognise some of that. How can you stop that family breaking down? How can you provide some safe space for them to avoid that family breakdown? And what they do is they build studios in back gardens and backyards, and they have managed to keep many families together who are at risk of breaking down because of that. Some of them are absolutely in crisis. So not only do they do the studio and provide that, it's just a bedroom with a bathroom, but it sort of prevents all that tension around bathroom and that tension about space. They also provide employment support and mentoring support for the young people. And a group of us, they actually came over to Bristol in the summer, and we met with them, and a group of us, including Jamie, are interested in how we might bring that to Bristol as well. There is actually a project in the bottom, and if you haven't been to the Housing Festival, you have got to go. It's very, very close. Called Staying Close, and that's being led by Bristol City Council's Children's Services. So on site in the Housing Festival, if you've been, that wooden building in the middle is actually being built for Staying Close, and that's going to go into a children's home to enable a young person who is moving out of the children's home to stay in close proximity and get that early support. What we find as housing associations when we house young people in their first home, and I'm sure Jamie can talk about this, is that those first few months even of having a tenancy is really, really scary. And imagine that if you've got no family backup, you've got nobody to tell you how you get an electricity account, you've got nobody to tell you have got to pay your rent or you'll get chucked out. You know, that mentoring and that support is really important to avoid that breakdown. I think Staying Close and Kids Undercover is a way of encouraging those skills. While I move on to what the project we're looking at in Bristol then, we started off thinking that we wanted to look at container housing. There's much talk about container housing, indeed there's some down on the festival site. I went to Berlin to look at some of their container projects. They've got a number. This is one that has 500 shipping containers. They're all for students. It's a private sector entrepreneur who's developed it. The thing about shipping containers is they come in 2 sizes pretty much, 20 foot or 40 foot. 20 foots are too small and 40 foots are actually quite big and very long and narrow. So going to look at the scheme in Berlin was really helpful because it made me realise that actually we probably want to do something a bit different. This is a project in Melbourne, again on that principle of how can you use modular build to house people quickly. And this is a project which is using highway land to build modular units very, very quickly, but that can be taken down and put up somewhere else. And this is housing people literally coming off the streets. Another interesting fact about Australia is that, which is really shocking because you think it's the sort of affluent country, they have double the number of rough sleepers per capita than we have here, and we're not doing that great, are we? And particularly, they have no homelessness legislation. So if you fall through the gap, you really do fall through the gap. And I was shocked by the number of people in a very affluent cities like Sydney and Melbourne sleeping on the streets, and the number of women sleeping on the streets, which was really shocking. So the project that we went to see, which we really loved, which was in Amsterdam, and a number of us went over, including Jamie and other colleagues across Bristol, is a project called Start Block Ribbertsken. And that's 500 modular units. We thought they were shipping containers, didn't we, Jamie, until a few months later when we realised they were actually modular build. And this is a project which was devised by a local authority in Amsterdam and a housing association who were looking at the way that refugees who were coming into Holland were being housed separately, in separate camps, in separate developments, and students who were being housed separately. And thought, can't we just bring people together? Can't we look at this integration and look at people as human beings who can live together? And we were really bowled away. 500, as I said, living very much together, learning from each other, learning each other's languages. So you've got for the students living there, they were learning English from the refugees who mostly spoke English. The refugees who were living there were learning about how Dutch society worked and learning Dutch, but also getting those contacts, those social contacts which we take for granted, about where to go to study, about where to go to work, around how things work generally, and making friendships, and making, I think, so much, having such an impact in terms of that community cohesion and community interdependence, because they were living together, because they were getting to know each other rather than seeing each other as separate. So we like this so much that we decided to bring it back to Bristol, and we've called our project Launchpad. It's not refugees. We're looking at housing young people who haven't got access to university, who've been housed by 1625 independent people, and students, Bristol University students. And what we're doing is we're going to be building 34 homes in one place and 28 in another. And the really nice principle around this is that we can do it quickly because we're going to use Bristol City Council car parks that are not in use anymore, either underused or underutilised. Can't be used for permanent housing because of the configuration of them, but we'll lease them to us for a period of up to 10 years so that we can put these units on there and do something positive with them. They're all going to be self-contained, so they'll have their own bathroom, own kitchen, and if you've been to the Housing Festival, you've seen some of those units already. What's really important though is that sense of community and sense of shared spaces. So in a minute I'll finish, and Ben and Jamie are going to talk a little bit about that. Motivation for why students want to live here. I think the average price of a student room in Bristol is about 130, 140 and going up all the time. So, really, really difficult to afford those. And we wanted to do something that was a bit of a different offer. So we're trying to hit these at a very low rent. We're trying to hit them at social rent, which is about £80 a week. We're going to, the university have agreed to allow the non-students, technical term, there must be another name for non-students, access to all the university facilities, so things like the cultural, sports, education, mentoring, whatever. But also for the students, it's about getting to know not just other students, but other people who live in Bristol. So one of the things about working with the university, which is really, really scary, is that all the students have to move in on a certain date, which is those of you who work in the development industry know that completion dates are a little bit flexible, they can sort of move a bit. I'm told by Ben we can't move the date, they've got to move in by then. And we're aiming to be on site by next September. So we've got a lot of work to do to get there. I'll ask Ben and Jamie to say a few words, and I'm going to finish with an ask of you as the audience.
Yeah, sure. You first. Just to say that we, at 1625, we work with young people that have become homeless, usually through family breakdown. Also, we work with many young people leaving care and actually moving people on from our supported housing. So we might support over 500 young people each year in supported housing. Is incredibly difficult for them, partly because of affordability, partly just they really struggle to compete with others for the little accommodation that's there, and there's hardly anything out there for them when they move on. But beyond that, there's a real risk of them becoming very isolated when they do move on from our projects, isolated in the community, living in areas where they don't know people. As Oona said, they don't have the family to turn back to when things don't go right. And for all of us, when we first left home, I'm sure things didn't go smoothly straight away. So they just don't have there's a whole risk of them kind of not having the connections and the relationships and the support that they need when they move on. And on the other hand, we've got students living in the city with a huge amount of student accommodation, and then we've got the two communities kind of not really making contact with each other. So the opportunity here, which was really inspired by the trip with Oona to Amsterdam, is just to mix it all up, as Oona said, to kind of bring people together and not have labels on people, and really let people live together, be supported to manage their own lives, to manage their own accommodation. And we'll be recruiting the young people together based on the same values, which is around their commitment to supporting each other to make the project work. So it's just a really exciting opportunity just to change how things are done in Bristol, and to hopefully have a chance to make it work and then see it replicated elsewhere in Bristol and also nationally. And the self-management model was something that really struck us in Amsterdam. It was about the way that if people are enabled to actually take control of their own lives rather than be done to, that they can really succeed and just learn so much from each other. And we see it very much as a mutual project where our young people and the students have so much to gain by mixing and learning from each other.
Hi, I'm Ben, Bristol Students' Union. I suppose Oona's touched on affordability, and that is one of our drivers. We know there are students that for which affordability of accommodation stops them going to university, and we know there are students that are here that experience real hardship. But I think the thing that really excites us about this is the community cohesion potential. Students and universities bring really exciting things to cities, but actually some of the models of student accommodation that the market delivers don't help with community cohesion. I work every day with students that want to have a really positive impact on their community, and I also work with students every day that experience real loneliness and isolation. So I think the thing that sort of inspires me about this is to prove the concept of creating a mutually supportive community that creates really positive life experiences for everybody living in it.
Thanks very much. And I'm going to end with an ask, really, because I was delighted when Jez asked us to come and talk as part of the Housing Festival, because what we're trying to do here hasn't been done before, and there can be a political, if you like, commitment to the Housing Festival to say, yeah, we want innovation in the city. Our next step is to do it, and it's in the doing it that we often trip up. And we need support. We need support at lots of levels within the city about planning, about transport. You know, I've already had transport planners saying to me, where's the car parking going? And if I say, well, students don't have cars, they say, yes, they do. So, you know, we're already having those sort of rows. And if we're really serious about that, I'm looking at Jez now, I know it's not just his responsibility, but we need that leadership that comes from embracing something like the Housing Festival to say that we're trying to do something different. And there will be people who are uncomfortable about that, and there will be people who may not be on the same journey. And I think we're going to need to, in order to, it's proof of concept really, trying to do something for the first time is really, really hard. But to be honest, I'm not interested in just doing one project. I think we want to do this because we want to roll it out in other places. Not just for students, not just for young people. You know, we've got a massive shortage of accommodation for key workers in the city. Is there something we can do? It might be slightly bigger, might be slightly different, but is there something we can do for them as well? And something we can do quite quickly. So it's a big ask really of, you know, yeah, everybody likes the ideas until it comes to the detail and how you actually execute it. And we're going to need a lot of support over the next, how many months have we got? 10 months and the clock is ticking. So, you know, we really want to get this underway, and we really do, we'll need as much support as we can get. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So thanks to Oona, Ben and Jamie for that. It's very interesting. Thank you. So our next speaker is Andy Redfern. He's an affordable housing development consultant. I've got a little sentence here, which is, I think, what you're talking about, but I'll give it a go. Reclaiming the real value of co-living arrangements and cracking the affordability issue. I don't know if that's a direct quote or unfair. Anyway, over to Andy.
Good evening. Probably, now 3 years ago, I experienced homelessness. So I had a relationship breakdown, and I was faced that scenario: where am I going to live tonight? And I've worked in the supported housing sector for 30 years, so I knew it all. I know what young people go through. I know the issues and how to provide housing for people who are in need. But actually, when you go through it for the first time, personally, it was a devastating experience of actually seeing my own well-being in a matter of days hit the floor. You know, I slept in my office one night. I slept in a travel lodge. Some friends, but it was amazing, and it really sort of spurred me on to think. Actually, I'm a normal. I am of sound mind. I've got money, but I found a number of barriers of trying to access affordable accommodation at the time that I needed it, and it was a bit of a spur for me to, focus on what turns out to be live share. So I know you're thinking, what is live share? We'll come on to that in a moment. Oona's introduced co-living, and co-living in many ways for me is just a new sexy name of shared housing. And my bet would be that every street in Bristol there is a co-living community. It could be two people sharing. I share a flat, me and my partner and a child. We share our flat with someone else. So we've got a co-living community. And I can imagine many of you are living in co-living communities of some sort, be it your kids have come back home and living with you. But this will be a typical scenario. There is shared housing happening everywhere, and what's happened is co-living is now the new buzzword, and I'll come on to that in a moment. The problem is, this is what we think about shared housing. I don't think this is student accommodation, but the whole idea of HMOs, which is often demonised by local authorities or by the local papers or by our communities, because it's poorly managed, it's often road landlords, it's of questionable quality. And this is the typical image that people have of shared housing, and understandable. Not always like this. Yet co-living is amazing, isn't it? It's, we can all imagine ourselves there, and they've branded it brilliantly. It's been an amazing thing. I think what the Collective have done, and now certainly in London, they've incorporated co-living within their planning policy. I think the Collective now going to do the biggest co-living scheme in the world in New York. That's their next big thing. So they've got loads and loads of money. So they've nailed it. The problem is it's darn expensive. You're probably looking at minimum £200 a week for a 14 square metre room, probably. The cheapest co-living I've seen in London's about £190. And I have searched in Bristol. I cannot find a co-living scheme, official co-living scheme in Bristol, unless someone can correct me. But my guess would be those sort of rents will probably apply. So they're not for people like me, or most people who are looking for some affordable housing. It's a choice. Co-living is a choice. It's a lifestyle choice. And a good one for many. So, live share. Why do we need a new housing offer? So my experience and my observations of working with young people over the last number of years is that shared room rent is just unaffordable. So I was Googling today. So in Bristol, I think your average rent for a room in a house is probably about 120 You mentioned about student accommodation, about 140. So if you want decent accommodation towards the city centre, you're probably looking about 600 to 750 a month. That's fairly typical. If you are on a minimum wage of £7.38, say, and you're in full-time employment, you probably can afford maybe £100 a week. So you begin to see the market is not catering, and now actually the big market now is actually sharing bedrooms. There's websites where you can just share bedrooms now. That's where it's got to for many young people. My daughter, who's at Cardiff University, has converted a van, and her and a partner are in a 30-year-old Ford Transit, because that's the only way that she can afford to live. I'd also say that the private sector is struggling. There's new HMO regulations that have come through. It's a difficult market, and also planning policy isn't very supportive of HMOs in many places, because of concerns of antisocial behaviour or concentration of certain HMOs in areas. And so, and with all the tax changes, a lot of private landlords are moving out of HMOs sector, or at least they're not. Hello? Oh, sorry, house of multiple occupation. So usually HMO, until recently, was 5 or more rooms, and they were not family, but unrelated people. But the new regulations that have come through, which I think are national, you could be a 3-bedroom house, and if you are letting rooms out, it'd be classed as a HMO, and therefore there's certain regulations you've got to meet in terms of room sizes and fire regulations, etc. So it's a quite onerous part of the sector now. And certainly what I was finding in London is most HMO landlords weren't taking young people who were reliant on benefits. People moving on from supported housing, the kind of young people talked about earlier, were finding it harder and harder to get into shared housing, because they were deemed as being too sort of chaotic or risky because of benefit changes. And universal credit, we've all heard about that recently in the news. And us as a sector, so I'm a consultant supporting small housing providers develop affordable housing. Our funders, so we would use government funding, is all towards self-contained accommodation. That is where funding goes, and all the developers focus on self-contained accommodation, yet the market, people are happy to share. But for some reason, government funding doesn't really support shared housing in terms of general needs type of accommodation. And therefore, the shared housing market isn't really being catered for by the sector, and the only people catering for it is either student housing or co-living. So it's a huge market. And a lot of the funding is based on average household incomes. So in London, now we use an average household income of about 35,000. Now, if you're a single person on minimum wage, the average household income is 11,500. And again, the housing providers, housing charities or housing associations just aren't catering for single people within the stock that we are developing. We're developing shared, build to rent or houses for sale. Most housing associations do not build for single people, and certainly not shared housing. So for me, I wanted to stimulate and agitate the market, and came up with the idea of Live Share, which is it's trying to redeem the HMO as a tenure of choice. How do we raise the bar? So it's taking all that's good about co-living, but making it affordable. So do away with the juice bars and the cinemas and everything else, and just focus on very high quality shared housing experience, making it affordable. So how do we hit the £100 a week or less? Excellence in design and quality. So using things like modular to minimise the energy costs, have good sized rooms, bedroom equity. Make it spacious and a really desirable place to be. So go back to that picture of the shared housing. All the shared housing in the streets isn't designed to be shared housing. They were designed to be family accommodation. So you've always got a box room that's too small, and the noise transfers right through the building, and there isn't enough communal space, or there isn't enough bathrooms. How do you build all that in, and sort of take, I guess, what is in essence type of students and not student houses being built, and actually make it available for people on low incomes. Particularly doing things like, I don't know, sound problems, and improving the performance in terms of minimising the energy use that's required. This is a design, so you've seen ZPod, most of you hopefully, or if you're not, do go and have a look at all different units. The architects of ZPod did a scheme for me, and we got the first one is hopefully going to happen in Southend, and local authority giving over a car park with some garages on a peppercorn rent for a minimum of 60 years. And these will do 2 townhouses of 9 bedrooms. And the idea is you have big bedrooms, you've got double bedrooms, we'll have ensuite rooms, because then Homes England will fund it. My argument is I'm in a flat and we share bathrooms, and that's the norm. But to get the funding, we'll have ensuite rooms and big, nice communal areas, and make it an attractive place. And the idea is that this will create a community of 9 people per house, and it'll be a mixture. So it'll have single people, some key workers maybe, some people moving on from the YMCA. So again, kind of picking up the flavour that Oona was talking about. So this is just one design. We're not fixed to a particular design, but the more design principles that we're looking at, and nor are we fixed to a particular construction system. So the benefits, it's geared at a group of our population that no one is catering for. Single people in places like Bristol and London, it's a huge market, but they're not being looked after. No one's really thinking about what their housing needs are. It will assist local authorities because they've got duties to provide housing for people who present themselves as being homeless, but there isn't accommodation out there. I think it would raise the bar for HMOs. And let's make HMOs as a great place, a great choice for single people. And I like townhouses. Townhouses are probably the most efficient form of density you can build in cities. It's more efficient than high-rise. So the Parisian sort of 3-4 floors of accommodation that you see is far more efficient than a skyscraper, and you can easily turn a townhouse back into family accommodation or some studio accommodation. So it's a good exit strategy for any investor. And crucially, it can be delivered as an affordable housing product, so we can then deliver it as a Section 106, which means that we can get agreements with developers to develop some affordable housing in their developments, and be classed as an affordable housing product. It's great. There's loads of money out there for social investment, but there aren't the projects out there. This gives a very tangible and real investment for people who are wanting to invest in things that make it have a social outcome. Offers high density, and it's great for infill sites. Very efficient. So it's a great way to look at those challenging sites in city centres. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks Andy. So our final speaker, we have Rachel Butler, who's co-founder, co-director of Tiny House Community Bristol, which is a self-governing group working to provide creative, ethical and community-led alternative housing.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
So I've given myself a bit of a challenge this evening. I'm not used to public speaking. This is a very unusual situation for me. So I have written some notes, but I've written them on my phone, trying to cut back on resources. So my glasses, I need to hold this, I need to look at my phone, so please bear with me. Right. So tiny house community, big resilient life. I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of the ingredients of our project so far, and talk about how tiny house communities can bring big, resilient lives. Here we are. It's most of us in our core group. We're just a group of ordinary people who feel really passionately about the housing crisis. We love the tiny house movement, and we're determined to create positive change for ourselves and also for other people who really need some help right now. We were brought together by our shared values: the Small is Beautiful Housing Justice Festival at the Centre for Alternative Technology. And a couple of people are here tonight who I met up there. Hi. And also the good old algorithms of Facebook helped bring us together, because Facebook seems to know your values better than you know them yourself. And they have a really good way of popping up all sorts of ideas for you along when you're there. So people are finding us really easily, actually, which is great. There are currently just under 700 of us in the Bristol Facebook group, and over 3,300 of us in the UK group. We also have an online Slack group that we use to talk about and progress our project, and we also use Zoom a couple of times a month for online meetings. But our favourite time of the month is when we get together actually in person. We start off with a bring and share meal, which really helps with group dynamics, and it also helps, we feel, because that's how we want to progress with the way we live. And then we get down to a couple of hours of a meeting where we actually work on the project together and move it forwards. So our project began because a like-minded group of ordinary people decided to join up and do something positive to help their own particular housing crisis. However, what became really clear early on was that it wasn't just a crisis of housing. It was also very much about loneliness, inequality, and more recently, the rapidly urgent need to tackle climate breakdown. We realised that in the spaces we build, we will also be able to address issues like plastic waste, air pollution, food insecurity, and the urgent need to transition to renewable energy. So what is the tiny house movement? It is an architectural and social movement that advocates living simply in small homes. There's currently no set definition as to what constitutes a tiny house, but generally 500 square foot or 46 square metres is considered to be a tiny home. The tiny house movement promotes financial prudence, eco-friendly choices, shared community experiences, and a shift in consumerism-driven mindsets. A word that crops up quite often during our group's discussions is enough. Enough space, enough stuff, enough of our basic necessities. But we have realised that together we can have abundance. Here are a few examples of some fab tiny houses. The one at the top left is called the Ecological Living Module. This was a collaboration between Gray Organshi architects in New Haven in the US and Yale University at the request of the UN. And I believe that they've actually incorporated all the sustainability development goals into the design. It's designed to be fully self-sustaining and off-grid. The one in the middle at the top is a tiny house designed and built by a relatively new friend of mine Rick Frankland at his own modular house building company, Woodall, up in Manchester. And he's actually helping a sister group of ours up in Manchester at the moment. They're trying to galvanise and run their own little tiny house project up there, which is great. Top right is the gorgeous Nest Pod, designed and built by another tiny house acquaintance, Jonathan Avery, up in Edinburgh at Tiny House Scotland. And he's also built the houses for Bite Size, which is a homeless community up in Edinburgh. Bottom left and bottom right are two funky examples I found on Google. And the one in the middle at the bottom was designed and built by Tiny Eco Homes UK. And a few of our members in our UK Facebook group have already live in homes from that company. Not to be outdone by Manchester or Edinburgh, it would be fantastic if we could come up with a Bristol prototype. So, what are we planning to do? Here it is a concept diagram of our vision of an interdependent and resilient tiny house community, which helps to convey the principles and how we would like to live. Each of the communities that we build will probably end up looking quite different to this concept diagram, as each site will have its own particular set of geographical challenges. The small boxes in the circles are the tiny houses, and within each circle are food growing areas. The smaller private spaces of the tiny houses are offset by the considerable space of the communal buildings. And the range of shared areas we would like to build include a dining hall and kitchen, an eco-laundrette, workshops, children's play areas, and also possibly things like a bathhouse. Not shown in this diagram is our wish to build a zero waste shop on site that will provide employment opportunities, in addition to helping considerably with plastic waste pollution. Other enterprises we've had in mind could be hot desks, event space, a library. There are all sorts of possibilities, depending on the geography of the site and need in the local area. We would like part of our communities to be accessible to the wider community, and by placing some of the communal buildings around the edges of the site, we can encourage a good amount of informal mingling of people from the new community and people who already live in the area. The electric car share, which could also be open to the wider community, will be charged by considerable solar panels on the roofs. We hope to harvest rainwater, and some of our spaces could be hired out at affordable rates to artists, creatives and startups. Profits can be fed back into the community to bring our housing costs down further. And our concept promotes an ethos of individual sufficiency but collective abundance. So we've recently joined the UK Cohousing Network because we recognised quite early on that our model is actually co-housing model, so it made sense to join them. Co-housing communities are actually intentional communities created and run by their residents. Each household has a self-contained private home as well as shared community space. Residents come together to manage their community, share activities, and they regularly eat together. Co-housing is a way of resolving the isolation many people experience today, recreating the neighbourly support of the past, which I really miss actually. This can happen anywhere, in your street or starting a new community using empty homes or building new. What are our values and principles? Our main overarching value is that everyone should have the right to a home, regardless of economic or social status. We also have an unavoidable responsibility and duty to the planet, its ecosystems and the environment, and these inform the way we choose to conduct our lives. This is a really big project, and it seems to be having more elements being added all the time, and it's probably going to take quite a bit of time to achieve. So I was actually really excited when I came across this chart on Twitter, and it's a chart which enables a more nuanced conversation to take place when you are innovating. And as this is such a long-term project, and what we're hoping to achieve is something truly transformative, then during our conversations with the people at the International Futures Forum, we hope that this model will be able to hold our project, if that makes sense. It will help bring the emerging future truly into being, and not just use disruptive innovation to sustain the life of an old system which needs to leave. So I think that would be really helpful for us as we progress with our project. So we will have an amazing opportunity to embed frameworks of living that are better for people and the planet. We've chosen a sustainability framework called One Planet Living. The 3 planets on this slide are there because if everyone in Europe lived like they currently do, we'd need 3 planets to support us. And the situation over in the States is that they use 5 planets worth of resources. So it doesn't take a genius to understand that the way we currently live our lives is completely unsustainable. We have got to do something about it quick. So this One Planet Living framework is a vision of a world in which people enjoy happy, healthy lives within their fair share of the Earth's resources, leaving space for wildlife and wilderness. It consists of 10 intuitive principles ranging from health and happiness to zero carbon that work together to help anyone, anywhere make truly sustainable living a reality. In October last year, we had a fantastic One Planet Affordable Living workshop co-run by Bioregional and Charlie from Transition by Design, who's here tonight. And this action plan can now be used as a design brief to inform the architects and designers of our future communities. We are big fans of Kate Raworth and her book Donut Economics, a simple but common sense approach to 21st century economics which aims to meet the needs of all within the means of the planet. And it seems to also align really well with One Planet Living. If you're struggling to read the words on the diagram, don't worry, because the next 2 slides after this one show them enlarged slightly. And if the feel of my words for this slide are different, it's because I have condensed Kate's words from one of her TED Talks, but it's okay because she gave me a full permission to do so. So we have a finite level of resources on our delicately balanced planet that we rely on for our very existence, but our economic model of never-ending growth relies on infinite resources, and it's causing catastrophe on our planet. We are financially, politically, and socially addicted to economic growth. It's time to think again, to reimagine the shape of progress. We need economies that make us thrive, whether or not they grow. We need a profound shift in mindset, but it's the shift we need to make if we, humanity, are going to thrive here together this century. Humanity's 21st century challenge is clear: to meet the needs of all people within the means of this extraordinary, unique, living planet so that we and the rest of nature can thrive. Progress on this goal is not going to be measured with the metric of money. We need a dashboard of indicators. And when Kate sat down to try and draw what that might look like, it came out looking like a donut. The one donut that might actually turn out to be good for us. The hole in the middle is where people are falling short on life's essentials. They don't have the food, healthcare, political voice, housing that every person needs for a life of dignity and opportunity. We need to get everyone out of that hole and over the social foundation and into the green donut itself. But, and it's a big but, we can't let our collective resource use overshoot that outer circle, the ecological ceiling. Because when we do that, we cause climate breakdown. We acidify the oceans and cause huge biodiversity loss. The green donut is the sweet spot for humanity. The red wedges show right now we are far from balanced, falling short and overshooting at the same time. This is our planetary selfie. We are the first generation to see this problem that we have created, and we are probably the last with a real chance of turning this story around. We need economies that are regenerative and distributive by design. Our community group want to take on this challenge. If we can creatively find a way to achieve this on a co-housing community level, it's possible to scale it up and spread it out. 100 cities around the world already generate more than 70% of their electricity. Cities like London, Glasgow, Amsterdam are pioneering circular city design. Bristol needs to be in this list too. We urgently need financial, political and social innovations to make this happen with creativity, participation, belonging and meaning. Here's the slide, the top half of the slide blown up. The social foundation data comes from the likes of UNESCO, the UN, WHO, and all in line with the sustainability development goals. And there's the bottom half. I've only got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to whip through the last few slides. We want to become a cooperative. We recognise that it's possibly the most democratic form of governance. We're having some consultancy for that at the moment. We've also come across something called Holacracy. And this is a form of self-management, which takes powers traditionally reserved for executives and managers and spreads them across all employees, and whose roles sit in a series of circles within circles. We've much yet to learn about this, but we have made a start and making good progress. And just a little bit about a possible affordability recipe is that if we are able to build on council land, if we're lucky enough to secure some funding from the likes of Power to Change or Homes England, and we understand that Bristol and Bath Regional Capital are galvanising to possibly help with the festival, we can incorporate a level of self-build or self-finish. And then once we've moved in, we'll be resource sharing, we'll have virtually zero energy bills, we'll have income from our enterprises, and we'll be growing a proportion of our own food. So hopefully we can bring our housing costs down by a significant amount. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank Thank you. Question time now. Can I ask the speakers to come up and take a seat? And over to you guys really for questions. We've only got one microphone tonight. Those of you who've seen me kind of manage this before. So what we're going to do is I think I'll pass the microphone to the speakers, and then if you have a question, I'll kind of indicate and kind of feel free to say who you are if you want to and what your interest is, or stay silent on that. But if you may have to slightly hollow your question, and I may have to repeat it if we can't hear it at the front. So if I pass this to you guys.
Okay, I'm Chris Askew. I'm a part of a small Bristol architects practice. We have completed recently cooperative housing, and we currently have 3 tiny homes on our books that we're working on. One of the big influences on us, and I was interested in your 9-bedroom house with 3 bathrooms because they all had good sized bedrooms, and therefore you could well have 18 people in that using those 3 bathrooms. There is a thing called the Nationally Prescribed Space Standard, which Oona will be familiar with, which sets out the areas of accommodation to be provided for flats and the like. And that's currently 50 square metres for a 2-person, 1-bed flat. It doesn't sit well with shared accommodation. I'm just wondering how we decide as a culture what is the right space for an individual, what's the right space to live in.
Yes, I was very conscious that to make live share truly sustainable in terms of it being replicated, it needed to meet the prescribed size standards. So there are prescribed standards for bedrooms. So if you want a double bed, for 2 people you have 12 square metres, and you have a certain space for communal areas and bathrooms. So what I've tried to do with live share is to make sure it meets all the national standards. So from a planning perspective, we can de-risk it, and also that each floor can also be then adapted into other types of accommodation that can also be compliant. So I've been very mindful. I developed some micro homes myself, Chimp Housing, a few years ago, and that was reliant upon discretion of planning authorities allowing smaller units. I think you can live efficiently in small units, but policy goes against it. So I'm trying to go with it while at the same time agitating policy and actually getting to think about housing a bit differently in terms of sizes.
I've got a slightly different view, and I am concerned that if we start to build smaller and smaller, then you get a race to the bottom. And I think it's going to be really important that we are very clear about when we think it's acceptable and who it's acceptable to. Because if it's just an open planning system, then I have got some concerns that some private developers will just go for the smaller and smaller units. And I'm old enough to remember when we had bedsits and they were pretty awful. We ended up reconverting them and converting them back into flats. So I think it's really, I don't have the answer. I think it's a really difficult question to think about. But I think some of it is around who it's for and how long they have to live in it. So if it's about permanent housing forever and it's really small, if it's about temporary housing, if it's student housing, if it's really well designed, it's got fantastic storage in it, go and have a look at Deborah, put your hand up, Tempo's unit down on the Housing Festival. Amazing amount of storage in there, which makes it just that bit more livable. But I do think it's a debate really that we've got to have as a society, because I would hate the idea we race to the bottom.
I think so. I've got a sort of background looking in evaluating housing over the last 20 years or so, and I think that the space is such a simplistic way of looking at the quality of the environment, and you can't really kind of have that quality measure in terms of policy very easily. So I agree, if you just set that square metre issue, then actually you do run the risk of people saying, well, that's the minimum, we're going to aim for the minimum, thank you very much. And I think the other aspect of it is that access to communal space, and I don't necessarily think that can be equally prescribed in terms of square metres, but actually it's part of your environment, your shared space, your access to shared space. So I think it'd be something that's interesting as the festival unfolds to start to look at whether one of the outcomes is a more nuanced way of looking at kind of codifying space, for want of a better word. I'm not even too sure what the language is going to be, but I think it could be quite an interesting area to aim for. I'm just going to take gentleman back. Oh, hang on, sorry, no, I can't give you the mic. If you don't mind hollering, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hello, Roger Lowry, Contractors. this isn't aimed at Oona because I know she's sort of differently, but to the tiny house people, you're focusing, it's not criticism, dealing with people, as Oona will know, it's like nailing jelly to a bloody wall. So it's nice to have a specific design for single people, but as we know, they become couples and become families. So it's great, and Oona alluded to it, it deals with a certain sector. So have you thought about evolving your thing for when the jelly slides down the wall, right?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thanks, Roger. We would like our communities to be truly intergenerational. We have a number of young families in our groups, and they have a strong desire to have free-range children. And so there's definitely something about modular homes that can be added to, or can be parts of it taken away. I've seen some really interesting self-build nominations for, there's a self-building award each year, I think, and I think Jackson won it one year, but there's a very interesting modular house where you can add a bit for a teenager and then you can add a bit for your ageing parents. So yeah, and this is something that we're going to deal with when we have our co-designing workshops. We haven't worked out all the structure of those workshops yet, and dealing with people is going to be very interesting, but you know, we need to have open hearts and open minds and open wills along the way, and understand amongst each other that we will get what we need eventually, and it's about finding common ground as we go. Yeah.
Anyone else on that sort of adaptability question? I think it's...
I think it's one of the inherent tensions in that, to what degree you build something that's kind of a system, a response to a particular group and a snapshot in time, and do you enable that to be adapted? And the sort of, I used to work with a guy who was talking about the hackability of sort of Victorian homes, that kind of ability to just knock it about a bit and to adapt their incredibly versatile and adaptable homes. And actually, if you build something that's very specific and very tight, and then your lifestyle changes, or you know, something unplanned happens, what's the ability for that, for the resilience within that home, for it to adapt with you, rather than having to move on or necessarily bolt on something new? How can you kind of finesse that? So I think there's inherent tension there. It's a good question. Oh, okay. Can I ask you to stand and project, please? Thank you.
David Kerr from Postman Architects. I was just picking up on the point about the live share, and how just that topic you were just talking about seems to be actually the strongest model, in the sense that if you're building communities, you don't want to shuffle people off the site once they outgrow the tiny home they're in. Whereas the live share model, you're building slightly larger envelopes with initially lots of people living in them. Now, if one accepts that you don't get too attached to the actual building you're living in, then there may be more flexibility for moving people around within the community, so that when somebody does expand, you knock some of those multi-occupancy buildings together to make them into genuine homes for families. Because I mean, the tiny home, and as you say, they become very, you know, if you design a tiny home very bespokely, it becomes very bespoke, and it becomes really difficult to enlarge it unless you have site around it where you add another unit alongside or behind, or you know, whatever. And the concept for the community site might not allow that freedom of space around each dwelling, although your diagrams look very nice and spacious.
Thank you. Yes, I think there is the ability to change, and we can incorporate that at the very beginning in terms of having different types of accommodation. I think what Live Share tries to do is create the first run on the accommodation ladder. So it's very accessible. It allows people to save and to choose when they move on. So the problem is the threshold to get into private rented accommodation, particularly good quality, is very, very high in terms of rent deposits, rent in advance. So you may need a deposit and rent in advance of over £1,000. Very, very few young people have that. We'll have to rely on parents if they're lucky enough. So how do we create the first run, and how do we create a place where they can then save, and then move on? Obviously, may not be in the actual accommodation, but it gives them choice to be able to move on into something that's bigger or more suitable. And how do we work with like credit unions, etc. So my view is shortening those steps and creating new steps to allow people to start on their housing journey.
Sorry, I keep taking the microphone. I'm in the habit of this yesterday. So, lady right at the back with the red.
Yeah, I'm interested in like mental health and like the psychology of these communities. So you've got 9 people living together, they all have their own lives and things together. So have you thought about how your communities involve, those different dynamics?
Well, certainly from LiveShare, I think it's the big challenge is how do you make those communities work and self-manage, and I think it is about involving that existing. So if you say you've got 8 people there, you've got spare room, how do you let that move out? How do you involve those existing tenants? And how you are intentional as the landlord in supporting them. So I think it's partly down to design, again, so people feel safe, they can live in their own bedroom and they feel very safe and secure, that the communal areas are places that are positive and welcoming and encourage social conversation. But at the same time, as a landlord, those interventions that you may need, if there's a breakdown, how do we manage those relationships? Can we provide an alternative? Can we provide mediation? And also in terms of the mix, not to place 9 vulnerable young people in there, but to get a mix, so Oona spoke a lot about sort of mixed communities. So there's a degree of self-management. Johnny moves in, doesn't know how to make, tuna pasta, and the lady opposite just helps him, helps him to make his first meal. That kind of stuff. So when you move into a, say, LiveShare scheme, you're buying into a philosophy of living together, that co-living, and there's an expectation that you are contributing to that community.
I was going to ask, do you see, because looking at Rachel's, there's a set of principles that are very clear around what people are signing up to in terms of a kind of a way of life, if I'm not putting words in your mouth, yeah. Rachel, but I think, do you see something similar being necessary that sits alongside your kind of tenancy agreement that's actually more of a charter or something you're buying into? I think
if you're offering rents at £100 a week, we will not struggle to fill them. But what you're then saying is actually, if you want him to move in, you're buying into the ethos, into the values, and it's an expectation that you are contributing. That's why you're getting a discount, partly. So I think it is really important. But I think generally young people, not millennials now, it's Generation Z, isn't it? They want to live in community. Speak to my children. They want to be intentional and live in a community and are very value driven. So I think it's tapping into a market that people are desperate for.
Thank you. Is there anything on the mental health point, governance?
Yes, yeah, we talk about mental health side of things quite a lot, and also that we've grown up in a very competitive, adversarial society, and have all of those values embedded in our natures. And as much as we all love the idea of living together in our communities, our hard wiring in our brains are just not there yet. So we understand that there's probably going to be an element of incremental development with that. So we take baby steps to begin with, perhaps maybe eat together once a week rather than every night of the week. We also talk a lot about when our emotions start coming more to the surface. When we're talking about things like how much space in our communities we want to be open to the public, for example. some people who perhaps are single are really open to lots of space being accessible to anybody. And then people who've got young children feel very differently about that. And that's something very instinctive about being a human on that level. And instead of not approaching those emotional topics, we tend to lean into them and talk about them rather than sweep them under the carpet. And I think we need to do that more. We need to bring things out. We've read a book called The Chimp Paradox, and we have a bit of a joke and say, oh, my chimp's on the rise, when our inner emotions are starting to come up. You know, and somebody will have a giggle and say, I'll give it a banana. And it just, something quite frivolous, but it enables a conversation to take place, and opens up that space to have those conversations and to be able to sort things out from that perspective. So hopefully that helps.
Can I ask a question? I'd love to ask a question. Put my hand up. Yeah, I want the mic. No. So I'm Jez, and I've been involved with setting up the festival. I actually live in an intentional community, house share, co-living. Let's call it co-living because that's the cool picture. I live there with my wife and 3 kids and 7 other adults. We've been living like that for 7 years. The reality is that the challenge with all these models is in some ways is not the physicality of the house. It's the people. But it's also the people that make all of these things the most exciting, successful projects, because it's that the mental health side of that in terms of relationships and connection and being seen and being supported. It's also that makes it hard. And I think with all of them, they're all going to find in each individual unit of a home with an individual group of people, they will all find a different way of gathering and working. And I just was interested in particularly thinking about the Launchpad, which I think is such an exciting, well, they're all exciting, but this is one that's sort of nearly there. This has been inspired by that Dutch model. Well, let's say that confidently it's coming, right? So, but it's been inspired by the Dutch model. I just wondered if you could share a little bit about how they've developed their management, internal self-managing structure, because I think it's a really interesting story about that way of supporting it.
Yes, and I think that idea of whether you want to live with lots of people is a very personal thing, isn't it? Whether it's something that fits with your own values and your own lifestyle. My youngest son, lives in a student flat with 8 people. It is truly, truly horrific on every level, but he absolutely loves it and he's really happy there. So, just anyway. So I think it depends on what stage of life you're in and whether it's something that works for you. What we're really interested in about the Dutch model is that co-management and how they've done it, and there are lots of rules, actually. So there are lots of rules. It's not all free and you can do what you like and la la la. There are lots of rules, and you can get chucked out if you don't do things, if you don't play a part in it. There are roles, so the young people in return for reduced rent have certain roles, and that's very important too. So I think it's about not looking at these projects as hippy-dippy projects or schemes that are free for all. And I think they're still trying it out, and I think what we'll be doing in Launchpad is very much the same. And the reason we're just doing one, we were doing 2. I think we're just going to focus on 1 now and see how it works. It's because we are nervous actually about putting that group of young people together. Jamie can come in, maybe want to add something, but if you are housing people who have been in crisis, and that's who a lot, housing associations like my own, that's who we house a lot of the time, because you don't get a social housing tenancy, to be honest, unless you get to the top of the list and you have got to have lots of issues in order to get there. Then you don't always want to live next door to somebody else or have a shared space with somebody who can have quite a chaotic lifestyle. So I think that's an issue that we're really aware about. And I think we used to do as housing associations shared houses. There's something about that relationship between being looking after it yourself and being responsible, and having a landlord that it can be all blamed on. So when we did shared houses many years ago, my housing managers absolutely hated them, because it was a case of anything goes wrong, somebody's nicked my milk, you know, there's no toilet rolls, blah, 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 whatever it was always on the phone to us to try and sort out. There wasn't that sense of responsibility. So I think what those models are, there has to be an understanding about that self-management and independence, and not a dependent culture. And I'm not sure we're there yet. Jamie, do you want to add anything? Because I think
just to say that in terms of, I mean, we want to get the programme advertised as quickly as possible with the students, and also because we want young people to really want to live in the project and be choosing to live there because it's the right project for them, not just because of the rent. So we're going to be promoting it to the student population. But in terms of the young people that we support, we have a whole kind of ladder of participation within the organisation where young people take on kind of increasing roles within the organisation, from kind of designing activities and offering them up to other young people through to kind of helping with governance and everything in between. And so it's through that approach that we can, the university and ourselves, really recruit people to the project that we're confident have that commitment to the community that we want to see to help make it a success. So I think the preparation is going to be key, and also the investment in the first few years in the self-management model, and accepting that we're going to have to learn from investing well at the beginning, but also be prepared to learn and change over time.
I'm going to ask a question actually. I was just thinking around kind of doing this at scale, you know, in terms of the size of the housing crisis and the number of homes we're looking at. We need to kind of do this at a reasonable scale, really, and I think this and kind of quickly. So there is a mainstream housing industry that's doing what it's doing. How do you see your kind of models relating to that? Is there a model where you could partner with a more kind of mainstream house builder and can sort of amplify what you're doing, or do you see that you can necessarily operating outside of that mainstream space? Do you want to start, Rachel?
Yeah, so I've got my own personal feelings about this, but obviously it's about the group and having group discussions and decisions. But from our point of view, and conversations have taken place in our UK Facebook group along this line, and I think the tiny house movement, certainly in the UK, feels like it's something very separate to mainstream. There are a lot of people in there who feel very angry, but they also are real active doers, and there's so many people living in vans and already, like the plotlanders at the turn of the last century, they're just solving their own housing problems. But they really, I don't think the tiny house movement sits very well with mainstream. So personally, I'd love to see more cooperatives, and then cooperating between cooperatives and being a true grassroots rising up, you know, and just that whole empowerment thing about enabling just ordinary people to do something just as simple as building your own house. It just seems mad that that's not possible.
I'm very happy to get into bed with developers. I think that we can demonstrate to a developer that live share is good value for money. They can get more affordable housing for the same buck, and it's an opportunity for them to open up a different conversation with planners on offering a new tenure that isn't available at the moment. And I think it can sit quite neatly in a built-to-rent scheme, that there is an element of live share, be it on-site or adjacent. So and I also, to the Oonas of the world, who traditionally they've shied away from shared housing because their housing managers hate it, but actually shared housing can work really well. We just need to often change our mindset, and often it's been used to accommodate vulnerable young people, and it's been a disaster. Actually, if the people like me, younger people who are just working and need something affordable, it can work very well, and therefore ought to be something that Oona's organisation should be developing, and then we get our national funders like Homes England to understand that actually this is a significant group that no one is dealing with, and we ought to be, from a policy perspective, planners through to developers, through to housing associations and money people, saying actually this is a credible, viable, sustainable financial model that works.
I think if you look at, I'm not too worried about scaling it up, to be honest. I think we need everything. So we need everybody to do everything possible to build as many homes as we can. And everybody who makes an effort towards that is just getting more energy, more more input into the system. I think that if you look at where most of the homes are built across this country, actually they're not built on the big sites. They're built by small developers on 10, 20 unit schemes, something like that. And that's where we're really going to make the best use of the land we've got, in cities. Do I think Launchpad is scalable? Yes, I think it is. If we can capture some of that land that's pop-up meanwhile land, car parks. IKEA's got a massive car park. I've got my sights on it. Supermarkets, there is just a lot of land that we just don't use very productively out there. So I don't think it's instead of, I think it's as well as.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've got time for 2 more questions.
I'm at the front. I obviously know Rachel very well, so I know quite a lot about her project, and I can relate to yours because my daughter goes to Hartbury. I've never seen so many new dresses for the party life with the singles in there, but I like your idea. But the concept that I was going to ask you is, you do it to rent. So part of the problem in our society at the moment, I've got a 24-year-old son, I've got a 27-year-old daughter, is the affordability of their first time buy. So, which has sort of got me interested there initially, because you sort of try and come up with the Z pod, which is, I say it's sort of 60 grand. Now, I can relate to yours more of what I'm interested in. So if you build a block of, say, 9, would it always be just to rent? Because the other problem is, if you did sort of affordability to have a first time buy for say 60,000 or 80,000 for say a 2-bed property, there have to be guidelines somewhere, because you can have people buy them up and then obviously try and make a profit on them straight away, or they then start renting them out. How would you stop that, or is that not something that it's a thing that's propped up?
Yeah, I mean, live share is the first one.
Yeah.
And if any commercial organisation, once you've got a community or consumers buying your product, they're right to offer the next thing. So what is the next thing? Is it a Z pod? Is it something else? Is it shared ownership, etc.? The key thing, I think, really is creating that environment that a young person can demonstrate they can live independently. They've got the confidence. They can build a deposit. They can improve their employment prospects while they're staying in a live share, because they can actually take that job or that zero contract and have confidence they can afford to pay the rent. And it creates that transition. It's transitional housing, creating accommodation that's at the right time to allow them to make different choices about their accommodation going forward. So live share fits that early part, and I think there are other opportunities, other solutions that you see out there, that you see in the press, that then allow for people to start taking. There's some really innovative ideas of buying very small stakes in your housing, and you rent a bit, and over the years you can buy increasing proportions. There are opportunities. I think a lot of the funding, the Help to Buy, is all about home ownership. I'm particularly interested for those people who are on apprenticeships, who started their McDonald's job, and Johnny's got no stars on his badge. Where's he living? That allows him to have 3 or 4 stars on his badge. So then he's probably earning, £15,000-20,000, and he can then start making a different choice, maybe into a relationship.
Sorry, last question.
This relates to scale. Nick, Una, Andy, Rachel, thank you ever so much. It pops from Una to Rachel. There's a couple of retired industrialists in Bridport who have thought through a business model and found some land on the edge of Bridport and are building 280 homes that will be all affordable. By, you know, and it's a big story around that, but the idea is they got the business model right, and the intention is to migrate it to being a community. So it's quite hard to build a community first and then migrate it into a place. Finding the place is difficult. They found the money, they found the land, they created a campaign, and it's 280 homes, which in a town of 13,568 people, if you scaled that up to Bristol, that would be 9,647 homes, which is quite a lot. All affordable. And if you're interested, the website is Afford a Home West Dorset is the RANT website, and the project is called Watton Hill. Watton Hill Smart Village.
Thank you. I think
We've kind of run out of time, I'm afraid. I know there's still hands in the air, so you may be able to grab a speaker of your choice in the minutes following this, but we do need to wrap up. So I'd just like to thank our speakers again, and if people want to... Thanks very much. Another really interesting session. I feel really privileged to be doing these. This is the third one we've done. We've got 2 more. For those of you who are attending or have attended several of these, the one tomorrow is not here. So if you're kind of in that sort of pattern of travelling, it's going to be at the Kitchen YMCA on Silver Street. So same time, different place. And then the one on Thursday, which is looking at housing for a sustainable living, that is going to be back here again. Correct? Yes, Jez is nodding at me, which is good. So just like to thank you all for coming and for asking such good questions, and please do continue to participate in the Bristol Housing Festival. This is the beginning. We've got 5 years of space and kind of focus to go, so continue to contribute, and thank you very much.